Alright, most tedious part of this whole thing is scraping that gasket. You want to clean that gasket off of there, polish it up a little. I used 320 sandpaper, some emery cloth, something to get it so it's clean. I spray it down with brake parts cleaner after I'm done because it'll dry residue free and give you a good clean surface to stick the gasket to it. Just a quick word on scraping gaskets. This is a gasket scraper. If you're going to use metal, these are all aluminum. Cast aluminum, you got to be careful. So rather than, well, they really can't show you in there because it's dark. So this part you don't really care about. If this test has a silicone gasket sealer in it, the best thing to do is get just a plastic scraper of some sort and just scrape the silicone off. And of course you'd be doing it in there, not here. This gasket scraper is great when you have paper gaskets, which this does. Most of it's stuck to the other side. You use this by going like this. Keep it nice and flat. You see the angle on this thing? Be careful. You want to keep it flat. You don't want to cut the aluminum, and you have problems with leaks. Yeah, see that silicone right there? So, scrape up your gasket. Take your time. It's the most tedious part. Make sure you get all that gasket off of there and polish it up a little bit. And then what I'm going to do when I put the gasket back on, I will show you. I'm going to use Permatex number 2, which you can't see that, but this stuff, once it sticks, it ain't never going to seal up, and I'm going to have a paper gasket sandwiched in between that sealer. And then also we have to clean the bolts. The little red stuff, this lacquer could be some thread anti-seize thread sealer. What am I looking for? Thread locker. The lacquer stuff, you put that in there, it'll hold this bolt in place. However, anything where you see it looks like this, all this gray silicone, this is thread sealer. So I'm getting a tube of thread sealer, and these bolts have to be sealed up because, like I said, they probably go up into the water jacket. So we're going to seal all those things up, put gasket sealer on the gasket, and put a new idler pulley on it and throw it all back in there. So I'll clean up some more stuff, get some parts, and I'll be back. Okay, here we are with our new water pump, and I said I cheated. I went to my torque wrench and my air wrench and pulled those off the old one. Took it in with me because it's a $15 cord charge. Nice and pretty. It doesn't stick up. So I got this fancy water pump thermostat housing gasket maker. I'm going to use that on the bolts, and I'm going to use my good old and trusty Permatex number 2, sticky to put the gasket on. It's a new gasket. See how the gasket's bending backwards, so if I stick it on here, chances are it's going to peel off. So what I'm going to do is put gasket sealer on one side of this, and I'm going to stick it to the engine. Then I'm going to come and put gasket sealer all along the back of this and carefully manipulate it up there and slide some bolts. I'm going to go ahead and put sealer on my bolts and gently slip a couple of those in there for alignment purposes. Maybe one of those little ones over here and one over here to make sure the gasket's in place, and then slide all the bolts in, tighten them up by hand, and then tighten them using the torque elbow. It'll be basically these two, those are the little ones, the big ones, the 13. Okay, so it's going to be that one, snug them all up, then I'm going to have to hit that one, and I guess the little ones, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, come over and those two there and that, so probably after that get this one, that one, and that one. It's just you go around and snug them all up, not too tight. It's like 110 inch-pounds or something, but how many? You have an inch-pound torque wrench, so you're just going to have to do it by feel. The 13s are going to be more than, of course, the little ones, the little bolts, so be careful you don't snap them off. Yeah, you don't have to really tighten the heck out of these things. Got to clean that one off a little more with my wire brush. Wire brush does wonders for cleaning threads and things off. It just has to hold it in place. The Permatex is going to seal it up. Yeah, I almost thought that said GMC for a second. And then we'll put the pulley gilly on. So let's get that assembled, and hopefully it'll stay in place. Alright, a quick word on the Permatex number 2. This is sort of like putting thick peanut butter on. You goop it on there and you gotta push it around. So I did it on top of here so I'd have something to push against. So hopefully when I put that in there now, it is gonna stick basically where I put it. I hope. It's really thick, so if you put it in place, it'll pretty much stay there. It's now glued to that surface pretty much. It looks like the holes are pretty good, so I ain't gonna go anywhere for a while. Alright, now I'm gonna do the same thing on here and then set it up in there. Alright, since I have my gasket sealer on there now, kudos to a fellow YouTuber. Dang it, I was just looking at it, the Fixer guy. If you have your new pump on hand, which is not a bad idea when you start. In my case, I said I like to get everything off that I'm going to end up replacing. In this case, I had to do an idler pulley as well, so I just kind of wait. But it's good to know where all the bolts go. So when you take them off, you have the new one, go ahead and set them in place. The only two that are really of any concern are these two over here. All the rest of them are standard bolts, are all the same length, I believe. I think they are. Oh dear. Yes, they are. So they're all standard length. They're all the ones with the 13mm heads. The only two different ones is this one here that has this extra stud on it, which goes down there. Down there. Big one down there. So that's second place. And then this little one with this little funny little spindle on it because something pushes on that, mounts on that thing. Other than that, those are all standard. The little bolts go in the little holes. They're all the same. No big deal. Alright. Anyway, so those are two. Only different ones. Alright, I'm going to put some sealer on there. What I'm going to do is put a little bead right down the threads. Out here, right down the threads. And then a little circle right down here. Basically just put a bead right here. As it goes in and turns, it's going to turn. It's going to end up with a bead under the head. So I may just put a little bead under the head anyway, because that's where you want it sealed up. And when it's sealed up, it'll seal all the threads up that way. Alright. I'll show you one. Oh, just in case you don't know. Oh, look at that. I got a lens problem. Tubes of silicone like this, RTV, this is a little tiny tube, but they're all the same. You look at the cap, I got this little pointy thing in there. So you open this up, and like always, I'm always behind. You're going to see this thing is going to be sealed up. I say I'm behind because I already did it. You basically take that pointy end and you stick it on top of that. And you turn it on in there and open that hole up. And then you put the top back on when you're done. Most of the big silicone tubes, you pretty much leave the cap off it. Push a little bead of silicone out the top of it and let it cure like that. That way, as long as you don't let it stay around too long, you just pop that little bead off of there and then the silicone's ready to go. If you put it in the cap, sometimes it'll harden up around it. It'll harden the top little part of the sealer is going to harden up. So if you leave it just like that, this whole part in here would harden up, and you have to basically put a drill bit in there, which is what you end up doing if you let these sit around too long. So unfortunately, little tubes of silicone do not last forever. Not quite as bad as great stuff. Expandable foam, which is pretty much used at one time. Might as well use it all or nothing. So anyway, all right. Let's see. Try it like that. So I'm gonna stick a couple long bolts in there for just to hold it when I get it in place. Put my glasses on. And that's gonna come out. I'm just gonna run a little bit. As this goes in, it's gonna turn and seal it up anyway, so something like that. That's gonna all end up under the top of that. This is gonna seal as it goes in there. As it turns in, it's gonna push it all that way and seal up the end of it. So let me get 2 of those ready to go. And those are gonna serve to hold my pump in the right place, make sure the gasket stays where it belongs. Yes, I make these tubes, little teeny tiny tubes of this stuff. It's ridiculous. Like I said, the stuff doesn't last all that great anyway, so you know, it's better off having little tiny tubes. They should be cheaper though, not $4.69, which is what you can buy a full-size tube of silicone for. This one says for water pumps and stuff. It's supposed to be waterproof. Yeah, whatever. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. The only really difference in silicones is red RTV, which is fuel and heat resistant. Fuel proof, heat resistant. So red RTV has to be put on anything that's going to be around gasoline or things like that. Use them for a lot of other stuff. Alright, let me go ahead and slack this thing in place. Okay, what I like to do when I put them in is basically either grab the whole of the socket. I use these deep sockets, or you could use an extension and you put them on the bolts you go and you twist with your fingers to snug them up. I'm snugging up the little ones first. That one's kind of a pain. I'll go over where those are because it's a little bit of a pain in the butt. And then the 13mm. And you can pick this thing up and move it around as you're putting it in there to make it easier for the bolts to turn in. Once you got them all in though, they pretty much should go right in. I said, most cases, in most engines, you're only going to have the big bolts. But this is a Ford, like I said. Too many Fords in my life. I love the way Mustangs sound. And they never stop making them, like they did the Camaro, the Traders. But they use metric and SAE right next to each other, so it's a pain in the butt keeping track of the hardware. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and torque those things up. Starting, just going to snug them all up first with the ratchet, and then I'm going to do a cross pattern on the big ones first and then the little ones. Just don't break them. Alright, so when you torque all those things up, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the 13mm heads, and you have 5 of the little 8mm heads. They are, so you don't lose track. One up in the center here, and this will help you if you're trying to figure out where they go in the first place. One there, one all the way out at the end here, another one down here behind this hose, another one all the way down up underneath the bottom. and then there's another one right over here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You're trying to put them in, you can't find the last one. That last one's way up in the center in there. Where am I at? Way up in the center. I can't see if you can see it that way. Anyway, also when you're doing that, make sure you just keep turning this. Nothing's in there. And then this will go on top of that stud with that nut. Now it's time to move this thing up in place, and then I'll put the tensioner back on. I'll put my new idler back on. Start hooking hoses up. I got some things to clean up on the radiator. It looks like I maybe have a leak in the radiator. We'll see. Alright, so I solved the mystery of why this whole thing was loose when I didn't have all the bolts out. Is because this is the lower bolt. There's 2 of those that go on this side. They both have cap nuts on top of them. So apparently this one was loose. It was not holding the bracket. It was tight on the end, holding the little bracket. It wasn't tight holding this bracket. It was tight holding this little hose bracket on there. So I managed to unscrew it, but I couldn't get it out and didn't realize I had to get up underneath it and hold it with a pair of pliers and get that cap nut off. Because now I can screw this back in there and tighten it up so the whole thing will be tightened up properly. And then put the brackets back on top of them and the cap nuts. There's 2 of them over here. Alright. Okay, some notes. When you're working over here, you have a tendency to use your battery as a tray. Of course, you got the negative. Nevertheless, cover up that positive terminal with a rag or something. If you drop say you drop these guys across these terminals, whoo! Aviation, that causes an explosion, and it's not pretty. Here it'll melt your tool. Melt it right to it. Melt big holes out of it. Anyway, so the bracket for this air conditioning, it's hard to see when I'm looking at the camera. I'm not looking at the same thing I am. I can think you can see it. Okay, there's one of the bolts with the cap bolt on it. And the second one is, you can see it right down there. So tighten up the bolts themselves with the cap nuts off them, and then don't go crazy when you're putting the cap nuts on them. It's just to hold those brackets. If you get them too tight, you'll end up doing what happened on this one. And when you try to take that cap nut off, it'll turn the whole bolt, and then it'll get trapped in there, and you have to grab it in order to get it out of there. It's a pain in the butt. The rest of the brackets, bolts, it's this one here, 13 millimeter first. And there's 2 hidden ones. There's one up on that side and one up on that side. If you get to this point and you haven't ever figured out how to get this thing off, there's your issue. Now, so I guess I really did need to have the idler, the tensioner off there. So I'll put the tensioner back on, I'll put my new idler back on. Now this sucker's in there good. Oh, I did manage to take this thing off because I thought it was gonna, this wasn't moving, and I thought that was what was holding me up before, so I gotta put those back in first. Alright, cruising right along. Stuck this hose on there, the other end goes somewhere, I'll find out in a minute. Vacuum line there. That plugs in, it goes somewhere in the intake system. That little stud thingy, there's a little clip on that harness that just pushes over that. It used to have a little clip on top of it. That's what hooks up down there to that sensor. I'll put the idler pulley back on. Can't screw it up. There's this thing sticking out, it goes in that hole right there. Goes in there just like that. Why does it have a T50 screw in it? I think I mentioned this. Because it's a Ford. Why else? Why wouldn't you put something completely different than anywhere else on the entire truck? Sadists. Anyway, that'll go on. That thing's just dandy. Then the new idler pulley will go on. Just going to tighten that up. We'll put the new idler pulley on. Go from there. New idler pulley, be careful. This washer is actually screwed onto the back of the thing to the other side. So don't throw this out. Sometimes they give you a new bolt, sometimes they don't. This gets unscrewed out of there, and you got to make sure you got all this stuff. It's got to have that little plastic bushing in there and the washer, because there's a big old hole in there. When you put this in there, little, now I done did it. Bushing goes in and fits tight in there. There we go. Nice and tight. Nice and tight. And that gets basically screwed onto the end of that. They call that a keeper. So that keeps that bolt in place. You can take that bolt off. Take this idler pulley off without having the whole thing fall apart, the whole assembly. And there you go. That just goes in there. Nice and tight, not wobbly like this one. And of course, that also is a 13mm. How convenient. Or is it? No, that's the 15mm. I knew there was a 15mm in here somewhere. I had it. Had it. Tighten that up. Make sure that turns. Got that turn, you got that turn, that turning. Now I'm going to put the belt on there because it's a lot easier to deal with before we put the fan on it. Get to putting the other stuff on there. So I'm going to try to do this so you can see it. I simply always just put the numbers so you're looking at them facing you. Make sure the pulley's right in the center of that pulley. It's going to be like one tab over there in the center of that pulley. Directions are right there. Goes down over here, down there. The back side goes on there. I put this pulley on less than a year ago, so make sure there's no cracks and pieces missing or anything. This one's like new. Goes around there, then it goes down around this one, back up to here. Actually, it goes under here. It goes around the tensioner, around there, and it goes under here. How are you going to do that? Well, I don't know if I can show it or not. That same 15mm, you're going to put it so that you're tightening it, and you're going to do this, and it's going to pull over and leave some tension, relieve the tension on it. When it leaves the tension, you'll be able to pull this down and put it under that pulley. Let's see if I can do it. I really can't tell, it's too bright. So, do that, push that down, that goes up under that, release that, voila dollar, done. You don't have to worry about anything falling off like on other ones where the pulley's bolted with the fan. This one, the fan goes on there, but it's ready to go. You could fire this up without the fan. So, next is going to be the fan. Yeah, fan's next. Let me take a look at it, cleaned up. Okay, so fan's cleaned up. Make sure. Let me do this. Jeez. There, perfect. You see that? Make sure the fan is tight, it's not flopping around, and it should be tight. It shouldn't spin freely. And clutch is nice and tight on there. Nice and tight. And remember, the threads are backwards when you put it on. I'm using a 7/8. I think it's 20mm or something, so when it gets installed, I'm going to take both hands to do it. And it goes backwards. I'll show you. Make sure you take the little cardboard thing off of the threads there. So you just take it and run all the way around if you feel like it. Can't do it with one hand, but I'll do that. And this is the deal with having the pulley, having the belt back on it, because now everything's nice and tight. You can sit here and do this, but that thing's really long, so I'm gonna take the shortcut. Right back, run it all the way over. Alright, that's on there, and if you're worried about torquing it up too much, I just take take a hammer and hold the wrench over there and give it a couple of whacks. The reason the threads are backwards on this because they're opposite the way it turns, so while it's turning, it'll be trying to tighten this thing up. Oh, there's where that other line goes. Dang it. Okay, well, I gotta get that in there. This particular case, if you're wondering why this looks so weird, normally this hose would be this big $120 hose or something. It goes back to the heater, and then it has a couple little lines. One goes to the they go to the intake, so one goes in, one goes out. One of these heater line goes back there, the other one goes over there, so the water circulates through the heater core and also circulates through the throttle body to warm it up. While the heater core, then they plugged off the heater core on this one. Take the heater core off, it takes, you got to pull the dashboard, which supposedly is not a big deal, but I haven't gotten around to that yet. So those were bypassed. We had a leak, had a problem in the hose, we blew a hose. So instead of putting the big expensive hoses on, which can't work anyway, we'd have to block them off down there anyway, so we just did this. Put that loop in there, all that does is just close off these. You don't even need that hose on there, there's nothing going in there. And it's just going to bypass this to itself, which is not the greatest thing in the world, but that's all it's doing, is running water back in there instead of running it to the heater core and back in. Okay, we're in some kinks are good, and sometimes kinks in water hoses are not. This one was folded in there like this. It had that shroud on it, this little cover. Oh, you couldn't see what was going on under that hose. Pulled that off of there and you could see this thing was tucked over. So I tried cutting the end off it. Didn't make a difference, it was still going to be pinched. That's not good. I don't know if that's related to any of these issues or not, but so I got a bigger piece of hose. Hopefully that'll work, and put some hose clamps on it. This is actually too big, a larger size, but you know what, I think it'll work. Alright, next step then. Start putting the radiator in. Before we put the radiator in, put the shroud in gently, and it just goes back up in there, out of the way, where the radiator comes in. And then we'll just drop the radiator down. It's going to sit on those little things there. Screws in with a couple of bolts. Those hold the shroud on, and the shroud sits, got a couple little tabs that go on the edge of the radiator, fit right on the radiator. Alright, let's drop that in there. By the way, get to these hose clamps. I use a 5/16 1/4" drive universal. 5/16 is what the size of those hose clamps are. And you can get to them a lot easier. This one I went under here, and don't try the screwdriver. Waste your time. Anyway, this radiator goes in, sits on those mounts, 10mm bolts, and whatever size that is, I have it over there. Put those back in for the transmission lines. This line is going to go, I don't know if it attaches that anyway, but it goes into the bottom of the overflow tank, that hose. And we're almost ready to go here. Okay, I don't remember what size it is. This I'm just going to use a 15/16. Going to hold, just hold some pressure on that. And I'm going to use a crescent wrench. So you want to hold back on this so you have it backed up, you're not pushing against, tightening that up with that nut. Same coming out. So, fill it full of water to see if it's I got nothing leaking. I think we got it. Drive it around just a bit. Come back. Put some antifreeze in it. These are good. done. Service with antifreeze. Some 50-50 in there. Half water, half antifreeze. Got my new hose in there, which has got a nice curve to it, so that won't kink. Good to go. Got no leaks. Drip while I was cleaning things, but no leaks, no dripping. We are good to go. Next.